Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Bridge this Sunday. I'm so glad you decided to brave through the fog that was this morning and seems to have lifted quite a bit, but we're just so glad that you're here. And if you're new here today, welcome. If you're still feeling new or newish, I'd love to invite you to go and see my friend out in the lobby. We've got Nancy over here. She's hanging out at the New Here kiosk, and she'd love to talk to you about our church, get to know you a little bit better, and offer you a free gift. And to everyone joining us online, we would love to know that you're here as well. If you visit our website, bridgechurches.ca, you'll see there's a link that says Newish here, and if you'd like to fill that out, we'd love to be in touch with you as well. Well, today we've got a really great service planned for you, but before we get into all that, I'd love to invite you to stand up and join the band as we worship our God together.
Wandering through the night, wanting a place to hide this weary soul, this big bones. I try with all my might, but I just can't win the fight. I'm slowly drifting, a vagabond. Just when I ran out the road, I met a man I didn't know. And he told me that I was not alone. He picked me up and turned me around, placed my feet on solid ground. I thank the Master, I thank the Savior, because he healed my heart, he changed my name. Forever free, I'm not the same. I thank the Master, I thank the Savior, I thank God. I can't deny what I've seen. Got no choice but to believe. My doubts are burning like ashes in the wind. So long to my old friends, a burden and bitterness. You just keep on moving. Now you ain't welcome here. From now till I walk streets of gold, I sing of how you saved my soul. This wayward son has found his way back home. Turn keep up this energy this morning. I know it's early. You're not done yet. God of the promise, God of the future, you see beginning and end. God of the rescue, God of the breakthrough, how great is your faithfulness. You're not done yet. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word won't be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. God in my seeking, God in my dreaming, you put a song in my soul. God in the working, God I'm believing, you'll do the impossible. You're not done yet, oh no. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word will be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're up to something right now. You're doing a new thing right now. God, let your glory come down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. You're up to something right now. You're doing a new thing right now. God, let your glory come down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. You're moving mountains right now. You're breaking chains right now. God, let your glory come down. Don't hold back, don't hold back. No eye has ever seen, no ear has ever heard, no one could ever comprehend. Your word will be enough, your promise we will trust. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. You're not done yet. Greater things are still ahead. You're not done yet. Woo!
Amen. Isn't it great that he's not done yet? And guess what? We're not done yet either. Have a seat. We've got an amazing service planned for you today. Again, if you are just coming in, I'm Angie. I'm your host this morning. And I just wanted to say that we've been in a series called What Goes Around Comes Around for the last couple weeks. And we've been learning about the concept of what you reap is what you sow. And in the concept, or in the trying to stay on the same topic of reaping and sowing, there's a few things that you could sow into today that you may reap later. So I want to talk about those few things. The first of which is finances. You could sow into your finances through our financial learning experience that is happening right here at our church on February 10th, Saturday, February 10th from, sorry, I've got my phone today because we've got a lot of dates and times and things, and I can't keep it all in my head, but February 10th from 10 to 12 right here at the building. So this is going to be, it's an amazing experience. I haven't personally taken this exact one, but I've taken a different one here, and it's really great because you learn how to budget, how to get out of debt, how to save, and how to get ahead financially. So that's just an easy 2 hours that you can sow into your finances on February 10th. So if you want to do that, you can sign up at bridgechurches.ca/top3, or if you have our app, which is through Church Center. If you don't have that already, I'll meet you in the lobby and I'll show you how to do that after church, not during church. You can do that on there as well. The second thing that I want to invite you to sow into today, this is specifically for married couples or couples who will be getting married. Wherever you are in your married life, we'd love to invite you to Date Night. So Date Night is a program that we started I think we called it Date Night last year, but anyways, it's using the Alpha Marriage course. It's a 7-course program that will help you to build a stronger connection with your spouse and strengthen your marriage. And the beauty of it is you don't have to come here, you don't have to do it in front of a bunch of people, you can do it from the comfort of your very own couch, and that's great. And the best part is as well is that if you are not from around here, you can join us as well. So if you are from the States, if you're across Canada, we have a way of getting the Date Night kit to you so that you too can invest and sow into your marriage. So that all starts on February 19th. And you need to sign up by February the 16th. Unless, of course, you are from further away. We ask that you sign up by the 12th so we have enough time to send the package to you. Again, you can sign up for that at bridgechurches.ca/top3 or on your app, of course. The last thing I wanted to talk about for what you could sow into is this church. And here at this church, we have an amazing program called Bridge Kids. And I want to tell you a story, if I can get it out of my pocket. Last week at Bridge Kids, my son, well, my girls too, they all learned about the story of building bigger barns and how this man kept building bigger barns to store his food and wasn't sharing with anybody. And they learned about how others could have benefited from him sharing with them. So when I came home from church, from work last Sunday, he had shown me this little package that they got in Bridge Kids. And inside this little paper bag, they had the story that they learned and a snack. And the snack was intended to be shared with somebody. So they were trying to apply what they've learned by sharing a snack with somebody they know. And so when I got home, Harvey told me, he's like, hey, Mom, I'm glad you're here, and I left half the snack for you. It was a little less than half, but that's okay, it's not the point. He still decided that he wanted to share with me, and he said it's because he learned that sharing is important, and he learned that in Bridge Kids. And I'm just so grateful for the fact that Bridge Kids pours into my kids every single week, and I just get to come home and smile. I don't even care what snack it is. It's just so beautiful to know that he's taken what he's learned and he's trying to apply it, and I think that's great. And this sort of thing isn't possible without everybody who gives week after week. And we're just so grateful that you help us to make these ministries happen, that every dollar you give helps a child to learn how to share. I mean, it's something they learn a little bit everywhere, but it's cool when they bring it home. They're like, I learned this at church. So thank you to everybody who does sow into this church and sows into the ministries. It's so much more than Bridge Kids. It's so much more than our student ministry, keeping the lights on. It does have a huge impact. So if that's something you'd like to do today, I encourage you to visit bridgechurches.ca/give, or you can visit the kiosk in our lobby. Okay, announcements for today. So before we get into part 3 of What Goes Around Comes Around, where we're going to be diving a bit more into Joseph's story, it's really exciting. I'm looking forward to that. I invite you to watch the video on the screen. If some of you were here last week, you may have remembered that there's this homeless man who got this ring that fell into this cup when one of the ladies gave him some money, and then he had the choice. He went into a pawn shop, and the shop owner said, I can give you $4,000 for this. And then we kind of left you on a bit of a cliffhanger, right? So did he take the $4,000 or didn't he? Let's find out.
What goes around, comes around.
What's wrong? Aren't you going to take it? Actually, changed my mind. I'm really sorry.
Billy decides not to take the money and continues to look for Sarah instead. As he's walking around, he remembers something she told him.
I work across the street. I'm sure I'll see you around.
So he goes inside nearby offices, asking for a Sarah Darling, but no one seemed to know who she was. He keeps trying, and eventually he finds her.
Is there a Sarah Darling that works here?
Yeah. Sarah?
Oh, hi. How can I help you?
Hello. I believe this belongs to you. You dropped it in my cup.
Oh my God. You found my ring. I've been looking everywhere for this. But I don't understand. I'm sure you could have got a lot of money for this. Why'd you give it back?
Well, you helped me, so it's the least I could do. Besides, a wise woman once told me, what goes around, comes around.
Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. I'll never forget this.
You're welcome.
Wow. You know, you should start a GoFundMe for him. I'm sure people would love this story and want to help him.
That's a great idea.
Sarah decides to start a GoFundMe page for Billy, telling the story of how he gave her the ring back. And to her surprise, the story ends up going viral. People all over the world started donating. Within a few days, Sarah raises over $190,000 in donations. And then a few days later, Sarah goes to find Billy.
Hey, Billy.
Hello, Sarah.
I have a surprise for you. 190,726 surprises to be exact.
What? This is all for me? But I don't understand. What's going on?
I set up a donation page and I told everybody about what you did. People around the world donated. So now you don't have to worry about sleeping out on the streets anymore. You can buy your own home.
I can't believe this is happening to me. God bless you.
God bless you too.
Yeah. Wow. What goes around comes around. You know, I've heard that said, I don't know how many times over the years. I don't even know how many times I've said it myself. What goes around comes around. I mean, I've heard it said a whole bunch of different ways. You get what you have coming to you, or actions have consequences, you know, all the different ways we've heard that said. And on all of those things, as we said throughout this series, all of those variations of that sentiment, they all stem from a principle that was given to us by a first century hero of the faith named Paul. Now, Paul, as you've heard me say many times, Paul was essentially the godfather of the early church, that we're here today in large part because of what he did with what Jesus did. He took the gospel, the message of Jesus, to the known world. He started churches all around the Mediterranean rim, and he continued to write letters of encouragement to these churches. And we have a number of those letters from the first century that Paul wrote. They're books in our modern day Bible, and in them there's all sorts of wisdom and insight and instruction. And in one letter specifically that he wrote to a church church like ours in a place called Galatia, Paul wrote, what goes around comes around this way. And this has kind of been the foundation for the whole series. Here's what he said. He says, don't be deceived, or in other words, don't be fooled, don't be naive. God cannot be mocked. That it's easy to look past what God has said. It's easy to kind of turn your nose up at what God has said and to think that his opinion on certain things doesn't matter, or it's not relevant today, or it's not worthy of your time or consideration. But don't be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Not a man might reap what he sows. There's a finality to this. There's a certainty to this. A man reaps what he sowed. And like all principles, the principle of sowing and reaping, as we said throughout this series, it can work for you or it can work against you. And we all know that because we've all seen this principle play out in the lives of other people, whether it's in their health, whether it's in academics, athletics, whether it's in relationships. We've all seen this principle play out in the lives of other people. And when it does, for good or for bad, for positive or for negative, it makes sense, doesn't it? But when it happens to us, when what goes around comes around in our lives, it doesn't make sense. In fact, it's confusing, it's frustrating. We get, we're flustered, we're confused, we get angry, we blame God. When it comes around in our lives, it doesn't seem to make sense because more often than not, we forget, while we can see it in the lives of other people, we somehow have this ability to forget that we're on both sides of this principle in most of, if not every aspect of our lives, and to varying degrees, whether it's how present or absent you are as a parent, how wise or how foolish you are financially, whether it's how diligent or lackadaisical you are about your health, whether it's your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. It could even be, how engaged or disengaged you are in your relationships. Whatever the arena of your life may be, what goes around comes around. We will reap what we sow. And what all of us will eventually experience, there are many, and this may be true for you right now, you may be experiencing this presently in your life today, that you are right now in your life in some area, or maybe in multiple areas of your life, you are reaping what you've sown. And even though everybody tried to warn you, even though your mama pulled you aside and said, "All right, baby, are you sure about this?" Right? You thought somehow the principle didn't apply to you, that somehow some things were just going to magically be different, that everything was just going to work out because I want them to work out, and you're finding out that you were wrong. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today because the truth is that's a really hard place to be. And the reason I can say that is because I know that because I've lived that. I know how challenging it can be when you reap a harvest that you either didn't realize or you were unaware that you were sowing into. And when it catches up to you and when what goes around comes around, it can be a really hard reality to navigate and to endure. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I know what it's like, how exhausting it is, how overwhelming it can be. It's draining, it's defeating, you're stressed, you find yourself lonely, maybe even lost. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. And what we said throughout this series is that there are exceptions to the principle of sowing and reaping. There are exceptions to what goes around, comes around. And one of those exceptions, and it's important to talk about, even though it sounds cliche to say this in church, but one of those exceptions is due to the presence or due to the reality of sin, both in our world and in our lives. That when sin entered the world through Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, it distorted God's perfect design. It wreaked havoc on everything in creation, and it left a wake of destruction. And as a result of sin, the presence of sin in our world and in our lives, because of the destruction that sin brings into our relationships and into our world, sometimes crime pays. Sometimes innocent people suffer. Good things seem to happen to bad people, and bad things seem to happen to good people. And that is an exception to the rule of sowing and reaping because of the brokenness in our world as a result of sin. Now, thankfully, there is another exception to the principle of sowing and reaping, and that's what we're going to talk about today. That's what this whole series has been building up to. What is this other exception? We're going to talk about that today, and perhaps no story in the Bible best illustrates this exception to the rule better than the tale of two brothers that we've been talking about throughout this series. We've been talking about Joseph and Judah. Joseph, an uncommonly good man, suffers unspeakable injustice, while Judah, a manipulative deceiver, this conniver liar, this man who has self-righteousness up to his forehead, this man enjoys just undeserved prosperity and popularity. And throughout this series, back at the beginning, part one of this series, we looked at the part of their story, the famous part of their story, the part that you probably know. Some of you would remember the flannel graph days in Sunday school. You remember this story. Maybe for you, it's Veggie Tales, depending on how old you are and whether or not you grew up in church. But the part of the story that many of you probably know is that Judah and his brothers hated Joseph. And the reason that they hated their brother Joseph is because he was treated differently. He was loved differently by their father, Jacob. And Jacob was not shy about this. He was not subtle about this. He shielded Joseph from the hardest of chores. He showered him with special gifts, the most notably a spectacular coat of many colors that served as a daily vivid reminder to all the brothers that they would never be able to earn the love that Joseph experienced and received so freely. Now, to make matters worse for Joseph, he started having dreams. And in these dreams, they suggested that one day, Judah and his brothers and their father Jacob were going to actually, get this, bow down to Joseph. That somehow, some way, someday, Joseph was going to lord over them. And they couldn't take any more of it. They couldn't take any more of Joseph's coats. They couldn't take any more of his dreams. And so Judah emerges as this leader amongst his brothers, and he convinces the brothers to sell Joseph into slavery to these Egyptian slave traders that were making their way back to Egypt, and to convince their father that a wild animal had killed Joseph in the wilderness. Now, the plan works, but their stories aren't over. The biblical narrative follows Joseph all the way to Egypt, where he becomes a central character in Israel's history. While he's there, he's falsely accused of attempted rape and sentenced to hard time. Somehow, some way, Joseph holds a tight grip on his integrity, and God lifts him up out of his circumstances, and he establishes him as a leader in the nation of Egypt. Meanwhile, Judah's story goes from Sunday school to soap opera. We talked about this last week, that Judah, got in a tangled web of deceit and betrayal with his own daughter-in-law, Tamar, who had become a widow to two of Judah's three sons. Now, Judah, he had promised, he had said that he was going to take care of Tamar, but he actually neglected her. And so over time, she found herself in a vulnerable position, and because she was so desperate, she decided it was time to give Judah a dose of his own deception. Now, if you missed last week for any reason, one reason, or another, you weren't, here, you weren't able to be with us, or maybe this is your first time, please go back and take in last week's message, because I really think it's going to put the content of today's message in better context. But for now, just suffice it to say, Tamar forced Judah's hand, and when she did this to secure her future, but when she did, even though this wasn't her intention, she actually brought Judah to a turning point in his life. That in this moment, Judah was forced to come face to face with himself. He came face to face with himself. And like Bill in that video, when he got to that place, he came to a defining moment in his life that would alter his life forever. And the question that each of these men, Bill and Judah, the question that they both had to answer in their defining moments is the same question that you're going to have to answer in your moment. It's the same question that I'm going to have to answer in my moment. And that question is, who are you when no one is looking? Who are you when no one is looking? Like when you're at home and you're home alone, no one else is in the house, who are you in that moment? That is who you really are. And don't be deceived. Don't be naive. Don't be fooled. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. That's what Judah had to come face to face with, because Tamar, because she tricked him, she did that to secure her future, but it also brought Judah to that turning point in his life where he confronted himself about himself, and it led to a turning point in his life. But his story isn't over. 20 years have passed since Judah and his brothers sold Joseph into slavery. Now, Judah couldn't possibly have known that Joseph would rise above a series of misfortunes, get this, to become the prime minister of Egypt. Now, during his rise to political power, he engineered a massive government food campaign to secure enough grain reserves for 7 years to survive a predicted 7-year famine. Consequently, there were masses of people who, all over the Mediterranean world that flooded the roads and the harbors of Egypt hoping to buy food. Now, the famine was especially hard on Jacob and his family, so hard, in fact, that Jacob decided to send his sons to Egypt. Now, not all of his sons, however. He didn't send Benjamin. For those of you that would remember, Benjamin is the last surviving son of Rachel, who was Jacob's favorite wife. He loved Rachel. And so consequently, he loved her two sons. And now that one of them was lost forever, now that Joseph was presumed dead, he only had one surviving son of Rachel, and he was not going to let anything happen to him. So the other brothers packed up their belongings and they made the dry, dusty journey all the way to Egypt, where they were surrounded by the throngs of people looking for salvation from this famine. Now, these brothers eventually found themselves in front of the Egyptian official who was responsible for selling food to foreigners. Guess who that was? The prime minister, who just happens to be their brother. But they don't recognize him as their brother. In fact, after all these years, it's likely that they thought that Joseph died as a slave in the Egyptian mines. Now, understand that Joseph is disguised, not to deceive them, but he's disguised as an Egyptian official. He is not an Egyptian, but he is disguised as one. He wore the makeup, he wore all the traditional Egyptian garb that Egyptian officials would wear. And so they didn't recognize him when they stood before him. So when they came in, they actually observed the protocol, the standard protocol that all people would do when standing in front of Egyptian officials. When the brothers arrived, it tells us, they bowed to him. Do you get that? In this moment, they bowed to him with their faces to the ground. And the significance of this moment would not be lost on Joseph. In this moment, it must have been as if time had slowed to a crawl, and this distant memory of this childhood dream 20 years later suddenly floods the memory and the mind of Joseph. It's almost as if he's having flashbacks of a dream that he had 20 years ago. Now, up until now, we've been focusing on this famous story from the obscure perspective of Judah, but I want to just for a few moments think about it and look at it from Joseph's perspective. Because the principle of sowing and reaping, it's easy to look at it from the negative context, right? How it works against you and how it should be a sobering reminder and all these things. But this is also a reminder in Joseph's case that the principle of sowing and reaping can actually work for you. Joseph had experienced an incredible ordeal. He had suffered incredible injustice, but as we've said throughout, he maintained his character and his integrity, and now he finds himself in a moment 20 years later where he is reaping what he has sown. Yes, he is in this moment because the dreams that he had were God-given, but he's also in this moment because he lived a life that would allow him to experience the fulfillment of those dreams. Over the years, I've been a people watcher. I've talked about this many times, but as someone who grew up without a dad, without a father in my life and in our home, I have constantly over the years watched other fathers. How do you become something you've never seen? It's really difficult. And so I've watched fathers. I've watched people who are successful at business. I've watched people who are great financially. I've watched different people who I admire for different reasons and different aspects of their lives. I call myself a people watcher. And I take notes and I try to understand, like, why is that person the way that they are? How did they get to this position that they're in? And one of the things, if not the one thing that is most consistent amongst all the people that I've observed all over the years, whatever the arena of life you want to talk about, even though those aspects of their life might be different, the one thing that everyone has in common that I admire, the one thing that everyone has in common that I would aspire to be like in a certain area of their life, one person who, the thing that they have in common, the people who are successful, wise people sow into what they value most, not what they want now. I've seen this play out over and over and over again over the years. The people that are successful, the people who are, ahead of the game, the people who are accomplished, the people who I admire, they have this ability. They have this history of sowing into what they value most, not what they want right now. The people who live with regret, the people who live with guilt, the people who live with shame, it's because they sowed into what they wanted now. But successful people, people who we admire as great parents, who have extraordinary marriages, people who are ahead financially, sure, there's a little bit of luck involved, but more often than not, it's because they have consistently, faithfully sown into what they value most, not what they want right now. And that's what Joseph did. No matter what was or wasn't happening in his life, he sowed into his own character, his own integrity, and now he was reaping the harvest of what he had sown into so faithfully. The story goes on. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them. Of course, he recognized them. They did not recognize him, but he pretended to be a stranger and he spoke harshly to them. And this is what he says to them. Where do you come from, he asked. And they say, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Obviously, everybody that he had talked to were coming from different places to Egypt to try to buy food. Joseph continued to conceal his identity. He masqueraded as a suspicious Egyptian official. And he says, and he calls his brothers, he says that they were spies. He says, you guys are spies, but they replied to him, no, we're not spies. Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. How wrong they are. Now, what Joseph does is he actually takes his brothers, and he puts them in prison for 3 days, just to make them squirm, I guess. He puts them in prison for 3 days. He wants to observe them. He wants to see who they are. He wants to see if they change. But the thing he wants most is he wants to know if Benjamin, his younger brother, he wants to know if he has fallen prey to their hatred. On the third day, Joseph said to them, so after he's let them stew, after he's let them squirm, after he's let them wonder for 3 days what's going to happen to them, he says, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back to your starving households. So who's going to stay? Who's going to decide? How are they going to decide? We don't get that part of the conversation. The part that we do get is, I should go back. He says to them, the next thing that he says to them, this is important, I missed this. Go on. He says, but you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified that you may not die. This is the part that's important. Joseph wants to know that Benjamin is okay. So we don't get the part where they figure out who's going to stay, but what the part we do get is they said to one another, surely we are being punished. This is like, man, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall to hear this conversation. Surely we are being punished because of our brother. Like it's like what goes around comes around. Like surely we're in this moment because of what we did 20 years ago. For 20 years ago, this has been out of our minds. For 20 years, we haven't really given this a second thought, but now it's all coming back. Now it's all flooding back. Now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of what we've done. Now we're going to have to deal with this harvest that we've got to reap. And they go on and they say, we saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. And that is why this distress has come to us. This is it. This is why we're here. This whole thing, this whole famine is really what goes around coming around. Reuben replied, did I not tell you? Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? If you remember back, Reuben is the brother who tried to convince the brothers not to kill Joseph. And he says, didn't I tell you? Didn't I tell you this was going to happen? You guys never listened to me, but you would not listen. Now we must give, listen to this. Now we must give an account for his blood. Now, after all these years, 20 years later, now we're going to have to give an account for his blood. Now we're going to have to deal with the consequences of our actions. Now we're going to have to deal with this harvest that we're reaping. And see, this is the part that is so hard to even talk about because I know for many of us, this is so real, it's painful. But this is the part that's so hard to deal with. And now I've got to deal with the fallout of that decision that I made back then, even it was 2 decades ago. Now I've got to deal with the fallout of that decision that I shouldn't have made, that decision I knew better than to make, that decision that I wish I could go back and do differently, but I can't. And what you see these brothers wrestling with in this moment is what I've wrestled with in my life. It's what you've maybe wrestled with in your life, maybe what you're wrestling with right now. And that is this painful reality that remorse doesn't eliminate consequence. Remorse doesn't eliminate consequence. And we think that it does. We think now that we've wised up, now that we've figured it out, now that it all makes sense, now that I see the error of my ways, now that my eyes have been opened, now I can see, now I wish I hadn't, now I wish I could have. Remorse doesn't eliminate consequence, whether it's financially, relationally, something that did or didn't happen, something that was or wasn't said. You can be remorseful. You can feel it deeply. You can feel it to the depths of your soul. But that doesn't eliminate consequence. Just because you wish you could go back doesn't mean you can't. You can, and it doesn't mean that the consequence isn't still going to have to be lived out and dealt with. And see, we struggle with this, don't we? Especially those of us who would call ourselves people of faith, belief in God, because God is good. He wouldn't let me suffer the consequences of that. He knows my heart. He knows that I would never want bad things to happen. He knows that I would have never done that if I had known better. Of course he does. God doesn't love you any less. God couldn't love you more. But the reality is actions have consequences. The reality is what goes around comes around. A man reaps what he sows. And this is so hard when it happens to us. It's one thing to watch other people that we know and care about deal with the consequences that they're reaping. And you could have seen it coming a mile away for them. And you're like, well, didn't they know what was going to happen? Didn't they know that it was going to end up here? I saw it a mile away. It's so easy. But when we're the ones laying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and having to live with the fallout over certain things in our lives, it's so hard. Remorse doesn't eliminate consequence. That's what these brothers are wrestling with. And as they do, they didn't understand or they didn't realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them. You have to imagine how overwhelming this is for Joseph after all these years, 20 years, and now his brothers are in front of him and he's listening to them talk. He turned away from them and he began to weep. Like he's just over in the corner, just overwhelmed with 20 years of pain, all of a sudden unfolding in front of him. And then he came back and he spoke to them again. And this is where it gets, and it starts to pick up. He comes back to them and he says, all right, we got to figure this out. You guys need to get back here. You need to bring your younger brother back. We need to figure out who's staying and who's going and who you're all coming back with your younger brother. So he had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. So Simeon is the one who draws the shortest straw. I don't know how it worked, but Simeon stays behind. He's taken off to jail. The brothers return home with a bunch of grain, and they tell Jacob, their father, that an Egyptian official has demanded that they return with their younger brother. Now, of course, that didn't go over well with Jacob, right? He refuses to let Benjamin out of his sight. Simeon's going to have to fend for himself. Once again, just showing that there's a favored son and that they aren't as important as him. Over time, the grain that they came back home with, eventually that grain reserve starts to run low, and now the brothers find themselves in a position where they're going to have to go back to Egypt. And this is where Judah emerges once again as a leader amongst his brothers, and he makes this vow. Judah, this is Judah. Remember Judah, everything that we know about Judah, everything we've seen in Judah's life up until now. Now Judah stands before his father, and he makes this vow to him. Listen to what he says. Send the boy, meaning Benjamin, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself, listen to this, remember who Judah is. Remember what he's been. I myself will guarantee his safety. You could hold me personally responsible for him. And he goes on and he says, if I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, if he doesn't make it back here, If he doesn't stand in front of you again, I will bear the blame before you all my life. It's quite a speech from Judah. Judah's done this before, right? He's made promises that he never had any intention of keeping. You have to wonder, is this sincere, or is this just Judah being the Judah we've all known for all this time? Maybe Judah is actually trying to deceive and manipulate his father again, that really he's self-seeking. He knows that, hey, if it takes Benjamin going back to Egypt in order for me to get the grain that I need for my family to survive this thing, you got to do what you got to do, right? We don't know. What we do know is that Jacob finally agrees to send Benjamin back to Egypt. He realizes that without food, the famine is eventually going to kill Benjamin anyway, so if he sends him, there's a chance that everybody might live. So eventually, Judah and Benjamin and the rest of the brothers, they all find themselves back in Egypt, unknowingly standing before their brother again. And as they stand before Joseph, they do what everybody did when they stood before this man whose word was law. They bowed down before him. Once again, the dream becomes a reality. They bow low before him out of respect. And surprisingly to them, Joseph hosts an elaborate dinner in their honor. And at this banquet, everybody's having a great time. And Joseph is observing his brothers, and he's watching them and listening to them to see if there's any hatred or any jealousy directed toward Benjamin. To his own surprise, he doesn't hear hatred. What he actually hears is sorrow in their voices. That they regret what they had done to Joseph, and they express remorse for the pain that they put their father through. As he listens to this, he wants to make certain that their remorse is sincere, so he devises another plan. This is what he does. Now, Joseph gave these instructions to the steward of his house. He says, fill each man's sacks with as much food or as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then, he says, put my cup, this silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. So what he says is basically, I want you to load up their donkeys with as much grain as they can carry. I want you to take the money that they brought with them to pay for this grain. I want you to put that money back in their sacks as well. And I want you to take this expensive silver cup, and I want you to place it amongst Benjamin's, the youngest's, provisions. This is his plan. Now, as morning dawned, the men were sent on their way with their donkeys. Now, they had gone far out of the city, it says, when Joseph said to his steward, go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this cup, this silver cup, isn't this the cup my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done. What he basically says is, after their small caravan gets out from the city gates, he tells his attendants, I want you to go out, and I want you basically to accuse these kids, accuse these guys of theft, and I want you to search their personal property. So as they do that, they're rifling through all their bags, and when they go through the grain and the bags of grain, and they find the silver cup in Benjamin's bag. So they promptly arrest him, and get this, they threaten to keep Benjamin as a slave. So here's Joseph. He frames his youngest brother Benjamin for the sole purpose of trying to figure out what his brothers are going to do. Are they going to sacrifice Benjamin to save their own necks? Are they going to use this as an opportunity to rid themselves of another favored brother? Or will they try to save him? Once again, Judah emerges amongst his brothers as the speaker, as the leader. And remember, Judah has personally guaranteed Benjamin's safety. But we all know that Judah isn't really someone who can be counted on. In fact, you can count on him being somebody he can't be counted on. Nevertheless, Judah emerges and he asks Joseph, this Egyptian official, if he can have a private word with him. And here's what he says, your servant guaranteed this boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. So now then, please let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. And listen to this. How can I go back? How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? How can I stand in front of my father if Benjamin isn't with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father. Wow. When Joseph heard this, he couldn't take anymore. He commanded that all the servants, all the attendants, all the guards, everybody leave the room so that he could be alone with his brothers. Now, up until this point, Joseph had been communicating with his brothers through a translator, but the guys had to wonder, now that everybody was out of the room, how are they going to communicate with this strange Egyptian official? Imagine their shock when he gazes into their eyes and declares in their own language, I am Joseph. Whoa. When the recognition was complete, the boys, all 11 of them, bowed low to the ground before their brother Joseph. But this time, it wasn't out of respect. This time, it was out of fear. And nobody had more to fear than Judah. Judah, who undoubtedly was thinking in this moment, what goes around, comes around. Judah, who had outrun the consequences of his betrayal for 20 years, was now standing there thinking, what goes around, comes around. I'm about to get exactly what I've got coming to me. And as he looked down and waited, he heard nothing. There were no soldiers rushing the room. There was no clanking of swords. There was no orders for arrest. Everything was strangely, eerily quiet. This would be a day that Judah would remember for the rest of his life, because this was a day that Judah got precisely what he deserved least. Joseph said to his brothers, this is incredible, come close to me, come close to me. When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt. And listen to who Joseph is. And now, Joseph said, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. This is one of those moments in Old Testament history that I wish I could have been there to see for myself. I mean, you have to picture this scene. Here are 11 young men kneeling down before their brother, terrified out of their minds. They're no doubt thinking, this is how it's all going to end for us. This has been 20 years in the making. We are about to get our heads served to us on a platter. And all of a sudden, Joseph speaks their names and calls them to himself and says, not only do I forgive you, but I want to invite you to bring your families to live amongst the most fertile territory Egypt has to offer. In seconds, these 11 young men went from condemned to death to the position of esteemed guest to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. It's incredible. Once again, the principle of sowing and reaping, the principle of what goes around comes around was thwarted, but this time it wasn't sin that caused it. This time it was grace. It was grace. You see, grace is the exception to the rule of sowing and reaping that you and I have the opportunity to experience. It's the exception to the rule. Joseph was an incredible man of grace. Yes, he found himself in this moment because it was a God-given dream, but he found himself in this moment because for years he had sowed into his character and his integrity, and he was a man that sought to honor God no matter what was or wasn't happening in his life, no matter the whys and no matter the what-ifs. And in this moment, he reaped what he sowed. And see, where this lands for you and where this lands for me, and those of you, you've heard this all before, probably if you've heard this story at all, but this is so important, and this is so easy to read right over and miss completely. But the question is, do you have this in you? Do you have this in you? It goes back to that question, who are you when no one is looking? Because no one saw Joseph for who he really was, but who he was revealed in and by what he did. Joseph was an incredible man, and Judah never really got what he deserved, as is always the case with grace. We get what we deserve least. And the question is, do you have that in you? Grace is the exception to the rule of what goes around comes around. And you want there to be that exception to the rule when you're Judah, don't you? You want grace to be the exception to the rule when you're Judah kneeling down with guilt and shame and regret, and you know there's no way out, and you know there's no way up, and there's no way past this. You know that this has been 20 years and it's all coming, and you're like, man, I wish I could go back and do things differently, but I can't, and now this is what it is, and now I'm gonna have to do. You want there to be grace when you're Judah. You want there to be an exception to the rule of sowing and reaping when you're Judah. But here's the thing. Do you have it in you to be the exception to the rule when you're the one standing with all the right and with all the power? Do you have it in you then to be the exception to what goes around comes around? Are you humble enough? Are you humble enough to acknowledge who you are and what you aren't, honestly? Do you have the humility like Judah was forced to have? Do you have that in you before it's forced upon you? Do you have that level of humility to acknowledge what you are and what you aren't? And do you have the grace? Do you have the grace to lift someone's chin who's looking down in guilt and shame? Do you have that grace in you? I hope you do, because that's what Jesus does for you, and that's what Jesus does for me. You see, so often in our lives, for those of us who call ourselves believers, people of faith and Christians and all these terms you want to call it, it is so easy in our arrogance and in our faith and in our self-righteousness to stand and puff our chest and lift our head proudly because we can so clearly see and label the sin in the lives of other people around us. And in that self-righteousness, it's so easy to become blind to the fact that I am guilty and full of shame and full of regret and full of guilt. And I don't have the right to look up and look out and point and condemn because I'm so aware of who I am and what I'm not. And Jesus comes to me and he comes to you and he lifts our chins and he says, come to me, just as Joseph said to his brothers. Come to me. You're welcome. And yes, I see you for who you really are, but I love you anyway. The more aware you are of who you really are, the more aware you are of who you are when no one is looking, the more aware you become, and the more in awe you are of the fact that there is a God in heaven who knows you by name and invites you to himself. You want there to be an exception to the rule when you're Judah, but do you have it in you to be the exception when you're Joseph? That's who Jesus is to you. And that's who Jesus is to me. And it makes absolutely no sense. We're going to continue on. Actually, we're going to conclude this story next week. And I hope you'll be back as we conclude this series and conclude this story, because the conclusion of this story has more implications for your story than you can possibly imagine. I hope you'll be back. It's the part of the story that you may not have ever heard before, but it matters for the story that you're writing today. Before you go, though, I just want to pray for you, and I want to pray for me, because in one of your relationships right now, you have the opportunity to be the exception to the rule. And I want to pray that you would have the grace to be just that in the life of someone who needs it most from you. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to stand here today and to open up your word and to look at a famous portion of history that has so much to say to the stories many of us are living today. And God, in our marriages, in our relationships, in our parenting, in our friendships, in our working relationships, God, it's so easy. It's so easy to be self-righteous. Yet you have called us to be people of grace. I pray for every single person in this room and every single one at home that, God, you would give us the courage and the strength to be gracious to those around us because of the grace that you first have extended to us. I pray that you would help us to become more and more aware every single day of who we are, to be honest with ourselves about who we are when no one is looking, so that we could be reminded of how amazing your grace is to each one of us. And as an expression of that understanding, may we be quick to extend grace to those around us. Give us the courage and the strength to be the exception to the rule. In Jesus' name, amen. Before you go, I'm going to invite you to stand one last time. And my good friend Emily is going to lead us in one of my favorite songs we sing around here. And it speaks to exactly what we just talked about, this Jesus whose love doesn't make any sense.
Before time's beginning, you gave your love freely, withholding nothing. Jesus, my Jesus, carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You stopped at nothing to prove you were for us. Jesus, my Jesus. It's extravagant, it doesn't make sense, never comprehend the way you love us. It's unthinkable, only heaven knows just how far you go. Say you love us, say you love us, It's extravagant. It doesn't make sense. We'll never comprehend the way of us. It's unthinkable. Only ever knows just how far you go. Say of us.
Amen. You may have a seat. I don't know about you, but I'm grateful that we do have this extravagant God whose love is just so incomprehensible, that he would choose to love us, that no matter who we are, where we're at, what's going on in our lives, that I'm just comforted to know that we are loved no matter what. And we're praying for you this week as well, as you think about everything Scott has been talking about being the grace for someone else. That's definitely something I want to ponder and to think about, particularly as it comes to as I think about my kids. And I think that's a place where I need to be better at extending grace to them. They make mistakes inevitably, just like we're God's children, and we make mistakes. So just something to think of, big picture. Anyways, before you go today, I have one more announcement for you, and this one, again, pertains to kids. Last week, we announced that our kids' camp is going to be called Scuba this year, and it is happening July 8th to the 12th. And it's going to be a really great time. If it's anything like last year or the years before that, it's one of my favorite weeks to serve. It's so high energy, it's so exciting, and I just love seeing all their happy, bright faces when they come in every morning at 9, and the volunteers are just ready to hit the road, and we're just so grateful for all of them too. Anyways, the registration opens next Sunday, February 4th. So parents, put that in your calendars if you want to get your kids in on kids camp this year on Scuba. Definitely sign up early. We tend to sell out quite quickly. And be sure to invite all your kids' friends, because camp is way more fun when you have your friends around. And it's such an easy way to share church and to share God's love with others, is by inviting their kids to camp. So we encourage you to do that. You could do that at bridgechurches.ca/top3 or through your app. All right, we're going to be closing out What Goes Around Comes Around next week. We hope to see you all there. But until then, much love, God bless, and have a great week.